Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
In today's episode, I was thrilled to talk to my longtime friend and New Dealer, Oregon State Treasurer Tobias Read. Over his career in public service, Tobias is focused on solutions, making college, retirement, and everyday life more affordable for Oregonians. He's currently a candidate for Secretary of State, where he's hoping to bring stability to an office that has had a ton of turnover in recent years. It's an important job, overseeing both elections and audits, and he's focused on making the work more transparent in order to build confidence in government and democracy. We talk about what it's like to run against an election denier, Oregon's ballot initiative on ranked choice voting, as well as Oregon's pivotal Congressional District 5. I also have a chance to talk to him about what led him to a path of public service in the first place. I hope you enjoy. Tobias Read, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
My pleasure. Great to see you.
Welcome back, actually, I should say. We had you a while ago. Very happy to have you back right now in this critical time right before the election.
I'm glad to be back. Last time was with Ryan, so I feel like I'm getting the full experience now. So thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I feel like we should do full disclosure for our listeners here. You and I have been friends for, I don't even want to date us, 20 plus years before
Something
New
like
Deal
that.
even started. So I'm super extra happy to see you and really happy to be talking about what's happening for you right now. You are a candidate for Secretary of State, as we said in the intro, currently sitting Treasurer of Oregon. But I'm so personally excited that you've jumped in the race for Secretary of State at this really critical time for our country. So maybe just wanted to start with kind of how's it going and why was it so important for you to go for this office at this time?
Well, thanks. It's always a pleasure to be part of the New Deal. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's part of the answer to your very good question, because the New Deal, I think, really is about making government work and demonstrating what is possible. And in Oregon and everywhere, the secretaries of state secretaries of state are really at the heart of that, giving people the confidence to participate. I come from this really fundamental belief, as I think everyone who is probably listening and is part of the New Deal does, that we're a better country, we're better states when everyone who is eligible is registered to vote and is participating. And we have a really long history of embracing that agenda in Oregon. We were the first state in the country to make voting at home our norm. That's one of the reasons that we have the highest voter participation rate in the entire country. Good-natured argument with Secretary Simon in Minnesota about that, but Oregon is the true top of the list on that front. and yet, for all the good work that we've done to make it convenient for people to vote, people still have to choose to vote. And part of that is about having confidence in the way our systems run. Every Secretary of State is different. And in Oregon, one of the other responsibilities is the audit function. We don't have a separately elected auditor in Oregon. So the chance to have the combination of election responsibilities and the opportunity to try to narrow the gap between good intentions and not so good execution is pretty tantalizing for me. And finally, there's been a lot of turnover in Oregon's Secretary of State's office. In fact, while I've been treasurer, coming up on 8 years now, we've had 4 different secretaries of state. So I feel like the opportunity to bring some professionalism and stability to an office that really needs it is something I want to do.
Yeah, I saw the newspaper endorsed you with a similar line, actually, about needing some stability in that office and the fact that you would bring that to your state. This is such. There's a lot to unpack in what you said, and I want to get to pull a few threads in what you said there. But first, the point is that you're making just kind of about where we are with our democracy generally right now, and why this is such an important office as we look to restore confidence in people in our democracy and make sure it's transparent and all those things. You are running against, which you're not the first person in the country is in a Secretary of State race to run against somebody who's, said that they wouldn't necessarily have certified the election denier. That just like how does that play out in a campaign? Do people care? Are they paying attention? Does that matter to them?
It's a good question, and I think it probably varies quite a lot. I mean, my joke, which is not so much a joke, about why I need help on our campaign. I explain to people, say, people are aware there's a presidential race. They might have heard there's a congressional race. Beyond that, it's all kind of hazy. And so part of our responsibility as a campaign is to let people know that this office does actually matter, both on the election front and the audit front. There's two reasons that people ought to care about it in Oregon. But yeah, I just try to make this clear when I'm joint appearance or a debate with my opponent, and just say we have really fundamentally different values and visions for this. He's interested in weaponizing the powers of the Secretary of State's office, playing gotcha with audits. He's interested in diminishing confidence in our systems, making it harder for people to vote. And I'm, we're about to test this, but I'm pretty convinced that Oregonians are aligned with me in saying we want people who are eligible to vote, but more of those people voting is a good thing for us. And so I think that the contrast is going to continue to be really clear. And it's a challenge when we have 3 competitive congressional elections in Oregon, plus Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who's just over the Columbia River in Washington, but uses the Portland media market. So our airwaves are saturated, and it's no stretch to say that control of Congress might flow through Oregon, at least the Oregon media market. So we're trying to find the kind of compelling and distinct ways of telling our story in that environment. And it does, one of my jokes is I'm not, the flashiest candidate that people have ever seen, but I think we have seen enough drama in the Secretary of State's office to last a while.
Yeah. And I mentioned in 2022, I think this was put to the test a little bit. Some like our friend Adrian Fontes in Arizona, Jocelyn Benson in Michigan, and others who were Secretary of State candidates running against election deniers. It felt like, in 2022, that a lot of those election deniers lost, right? That's not true all the way up and down the ballot. There's some local races where that wasn't true. But, I find it interesting because I still hear people talk about the fact that when we're doing polls, democracy doesn't bubble up as a top campaign issue. But I kind of feel in my heart of hearts that there's some kind of threshold of just being a serious candidate who's serious about democracy, even if it's not going to, if someone calls you and asks you, you're not going to say it's top of mind. But I kind of think that it bore out in 2022. I just, I wonder, as you're like knocking doors and stuff and you're talking to people about what the Secretary of State's office does, do people say, yeah, that's, I do worry about that, or that's something that's on my mind?
Yeah, I think it does. And by the way, Adrian was here with us a couple of weeks ago and spent the day campaigning with us. So it was really nice to have the benefit of his experience with an election denier, because there are some similarities. I think in Oregon, it's kind of unique in some ways because we were the first state to go to mail-in elections, all our elections. So even 25 years later, as we find ourselves, I do sometimes saying, well, when people go to the polls, wait a minute, we don't have polls. There are no polls. When people return their ballots. And as a result of that, I think people feel a certain pride in that. My opponent not only is opposed to that, he was a party to a lawsuit that sought to overturn mail-in voting, and they took that case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and even this United States Supreme Court waved them away and said that just because you don't like something does not make it illegal or unconstitutional. So I think people can kind of feel the combination of pride at what we've done in Oregon and sort of insulted to say, wait, you're doing what? You're trying to overturn this thing we like? And, that's just the tip of the iceberg with my guy here. So we got lots to talk about and drawing that contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such an important point that Oregon was so early. I mean, decades, right? You guys have been doing the vote by mail. People like it. It's popular. Do you feel like there's, because of the attack on vote by mail nationally, that you're hearing more questions or concerns, even legitimate ones, about like how the system works, or Do people need more explanation now?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily for the reasons you articulated, although that's part of it too. We have a really, really frustrating situation that has developed recently because of the interaction of two slightly overlapping policies that are independent. We followed up our pioneering approach to voting at home with automatic voter registration, and that's a good thing. Separately, we also said you can get a driver's license in Oregon even if you are not a citizen, because that's about competence in driving and insurance and that sort of thing. But these two things should not interact. Unfortunately, the DMV and the Secretary of State's office did not do a good job of late in separating those. And the result has been that we have about 1,200 people, 1,300 people who were registered who are not citizens. Only about 9 of them have voted. It's clearly not affecting the outcomes of elections, but it's absolutely affecting confidence in our automatic voter registration system. And that has been a serious problem. So I've been very outspoken in saying I'm as someone who believes in the goal of making sure that everyone who is eligible to register is registered. I'm as mad about that as anybody, and I'm not happy with the way the DMV and the Secretary of State's office have handled it. So that has generated definitely some consternation and concern, including on my part. So we will definitely be prioritizing the review and the changes that need to be made to that process to make sure that only people who are eligible to be registered are registered.
Yeah, I saw that in the news. Yeah, I think that's super important. Tell me a little bit about what else you're running on in terms of your platform. What other kind of goals are you going to have for the office if elected?
So I think on the part of elections, for all the things we're proud of, we can still make things more convenient and add more confidence for people, making sure that there is a universal system of notification around ballot processes. A few of us who live in some counties get to participate in something where I just got my text last week that said, hey, your ballot is on the way. Now I've received it. When I return the ballot, I'll get another one that says your ballot has been received, and then a third one that says your ballot's been accepted. It's an indication that the signature has been verified and it's going to be counted. The only reason that's not available across the state is cost, and yet it's not that expensive. So I really think that's a good investment the state should be making. In addition, there have been some really interesting results from some other counties, and particularly in California, that have done what they call ballot ride-along. So letting people, whether they're just interested or skeptical, follow the process and the path that a ballot does, so as to boost their understanding and confidence about the controls and protocols that are in place. And obviously, people then are much more capable and willing to tell that story to other people. So those are important things, I think, on the election front. On the audit front, my joke for a while now has been that when you're state treasurer, everyone has a stock tip. And when you're running for Secretary of State, everyone has something that they want to be audited. They might all be absolutely right, but it's clear that there is going to be a pretty big gap between that appetite and the capacity. So having a really robust and rigorous process to build an audit plan that's based not on anecdotes or predetermined outcomes or political agendas, but on real risk assessments is going to be essential, so that we can have audits that are aimed where we can get the most bang for our audit buck, followed by an intentional process to get those findings in front of people, because usually it's not the Secretary of State that makes decisions based on those. It's the legislature or a school board or local government, and it's going to be really important that those findings are present and front of mind for those decision makers. So those are really important. And then I think just continuing to professionalize and stabilize and make more resilient an office that has not had consistent leadership. The last person to be elected to and serve a full term as Secretary of State was Kate Brown. It was a decade ago.
Yeah, that's wild. Actually, wild. That is unique that you've got the audit responsibility and authority. That's not something that you see in a lot of Secretary of States around the country. So, can you say a little bit more about that? What's under your purview? What are the options of all those things that people want you to be auditing?
We could probably spend all the time we have left and more, because that power extends to any place that state money goes. So it's obviously state agencies and state programs, but it's also Oregon has 197 independently elected school boards, each of which spend the majority of their money from state income taxes. So it goes there too, and it goes to other forms of local government. And it's both financial audits and performance audits. The description that I was talking about is mostly around performance audits. So financial audits are much less problematic, but performance audits, that's the three criteria I really have in mind about how to build an audit plan are: one, where we spend a lot of money and not getting the results we want. In Oregon right now, that could easily be affordable housing or education, any other number of things too, but two examples there. A second criteria is where we have a history of underperformance, and I'd point to IT as an example there. And the third is where the state is taking a direct responsibility for the well-being of Oregonians. That might be foster care or people who are incarcerated. Just examples, of course, and there's lots of others. But we think about how do we focus across a really wide range of things. Those are going to be criteria for me.
Yeah. Well, there's a thread here for me, which is what you were talking about, the ballot ride-alongs, and then you're talking about the audits. It's transparency, right? It is essentially this idea that, if we, are to have a robust democracy and have people have faith in the system, that, there needs to be a transparency in a sense of, a faith in that system. So we were talking a little bit right before we started taping here about kind of what happens post-election. And elections are just one step in getting people to those spots where they can actually govern. What do you think needs to happen, like just writ large, about kind of restoring people's faith in either democracy, specifically the Secretary of State, or just more broadly, kind of in government generally?
Well, I like the way you said it, transparency, and I'm sure you won't disagree with me that transparency is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. It's the ability or the platform on which we can try to build confidence amongst people. Our system is based on consent of the governed, and part of the consent is the confidence that we're doing the right thing. Not that we're going to be 100% or 100% execution or 100% accurate, or that we're going to do all the right things all the time, but at least having the ability to say, this is our good intent, and sometimes the execution doesn't follow, in which case we need to change course. I think government needs to be much faster in both directions, faster to start new things and respond to needs, but equally to get faster at quitting things that didn't work. We look in the private sector, and I think this is one of the great strengths of our country as an economy, that people are willing to innovate, and it is not a fatal kind of blow if your startup doesn't work out. In many ways, it's a badge of honor, and people talk about that. But somehow we don't feel that way when it comes to government. So much of government is administered by fear of headlines. We should get over that and be able to say, we tried this, it didn't work. Here's what we learned, and here's what we're going to do differently in our next attempt. But somehow we think of these things, the private and public sector, as so different. And back to that audit point, I hear all the time, people say government doesn't do IT well. We know who else doesn't do IT well? Everyone. In the private sector, the same things happen. They're just not headlines in the same way. So being humble enough to admit when we didn't get it exactly right, I think can go a long way towards building confidence. And the other thread of what we were talking about before we started was the mistake that we make in thinking about campaigns and governing as separate things. They are in terms of process, but what happens in one affects the other. And I think we have to keep those in mind in the tone that we take, in the way that we're going to have to, the people who are our opponents in the campaigns are the same people we're going to need to work with when we're governing. So make your disagreements clear, but make them respectfully, because you're going to have to work with these people too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with more of everything you said. I think this is not exactly what you were talking about, but even this idea that, like, the flip-flopping idea, right? That somehow if you believe something one day and then decide that maybe you get more information, you learn more, you feel differently, you change your mind, somehow that's like such a bad thing in politics, but yet
remember John Maynard Keynes said, when the evidence changes, I change my mind. What do you do?
Yeah, exactly. And I find it so, to your point, like the incentives are all wrong, right? The incentives are to keep your head down, not get, not put it up so that, and take a risk or do something because it might fail.
Right.
And so, I really think, you and I have talked about this for literally decades now, but, I just think we have to, change the language, right, around how we talk about government, how we talk about expectations, how we talk about the people in government. To your point about the people you have to work with after you run against them, change the, the language about people that is a political opponent, not a, particularly very timely with the president, former president saying these words, like not an enemy, but essentially just an opponent. And then once you get past that governing, that campaigning, as you said, you have to govern. Yeah. So what else, and then the last thing I would say, which I know, I believe, but I think that as Democrats specifically, like, because we are people who say, hey, government has an important role to play and we're not the people trying to burn the house down, we actually have a special responsibility to make it work well and to show that it can work well.
Totally.
Right?
That is a huge motivator for me too, because especially in Oregon, I feel like we got a hall of fame in Oregon of well-intended ideas that were poorly executed. The result of that is often a real satisfaction with mediocrity that, I feel like Oregon people can sometimes feel like, well, we can't even do basic things all that well. Why would we, or why could we aspire to something bigger? And that's not okay. That's not, those of us who believe in the power of government to make lives better, that's not something we should accept. And now that we're in the habit of quoting people here, whenever I feel like I need that little inspiration, just go listen to John Kennedy's speech in Houston. We're going to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And we're not doing that in the way that we should. I mean, there are a lot of great New Deal people doing great things around the country, but on the whole, I don't think we're doing enough of that in this country. So when each of us have a little role to play in delivering and executing and building people's confidence and willingness to aspire to big things, that's going to be better for all of us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. What do you think? You're like, tell me about, you get elected day one. What happens?
Well, it depends on what you mean by day one. I've had this experience once before when I was elected treasurer, and the reality, I mean, maybe it's different in other states. In Oregon, it's not like the presidential transition where you've had people working on this for months and it's all smooth. There's a very short period of time. So biggest thing is going to be having a team in place. And I have a couple people in mind that will come with me from Treasury if I'm lucky enough to be elected. But beyond that, there's some pretty specific skills that are particular to the Secretary of State's office. So we will be working really hard to identify the roster of talent that we want to have in place. And then I think it's going to be hitting the ground running, because there's a clock on all of us in these offices. We want to make sure that we have a really clear agenda that is that strikes the right balance of being ambitious but not unrealistic. And this office that has had so much turnover, I think a lot of it is going to be about setting the right expectations and building the right culture and being clear about how accountability is going to be part of our approach as well.
Yeah. Can I go back to politics for a minute? You mentioned the fact that you've got some House races. I'll shout out one because we have a fellow New Dealer running in Oregon 5, Janelle Bynum, which is probably one of the districts through which the power for the U.S. House will flow. What are you seeing, hearing, feeling about that race?
Well, there's no question that is one of those top races. You can see evidence of that for all the people who have been here to be part of that race, including hopefully Speaker Jeffries, including our good friend Bakari Sellers, who was here last weekend. We spent some time on the Bynum campaign as well. I think there's just it's a contrast here as well. And I never miss a chance to point out that Janelle Bynum has already beaten Lori Chavez-DeRemer, not once, but twice when they ran for the legislature. So I have a lot of optimism that this is going to be number 3 because of the record and the approach that she has and the clear choices that the Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer has made in aligning herself with the former president. So I think there's, it's a strange thing in Oregon when people talk about GOTV. In other places, it's all leading up to one day. It's a 3-week process in Oregon.
Right.
We are about bringing ballots back as quickly as we can, and that's where we are right now. So everyone's chasing the ballots and encouraging people to get them back, and I feel a lot of optimism about her chances.
That's so great. To your point, though, you guys ballots can be turned in already, right?
Yes.
So what are you seeing in terms of, do you have a sense of enthusiasm? Are people turning ballots back in early? What does it look like?
It is a little early to know that yet. So the way it works, when people, and it's funny, I found this is the most effective GOTV strategy, is to talk to people and say, did you know that when your ballot is returned, your name comes off the list that candidates use to call people? And their eyes get big and they say, really? I say, yeah, reclaim your phone. You just return your ballot. Save everybody these resources. Make sure that campaigns are going after the people who need the help. Just get it done early. So most people got their ballots Thursday or Friday of last week. We're talking on Monday here. So counties give those updates back to campaigns on a day-to-day basis. But today is going to be the first day when there is a big glut of information from returns over the weekend. And then we'll begin to see the patterns, both geographically and demographically. And there are a lot of people who have strong opinions based on where those numbers are, in the state, or if Democrats or independents or Republicans are returning their ballots at higher rates, or off the trend. But I don't have that info yet. But in the next couple of days, we'll begin to see it. In terms of anecdotes, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm amongst Democrats, fueled without a doubt by the Vice President, Governor Walz. So we're going to be, I think, much advantaged by that dynamic as well.
Yeah. You've also got one ballot. You've got a bunch of ballot initiatives. You can tell me if I should be paying attention to the other ones. I was going to ask you specifically about the ranked choice voting one, just because I find it so interesting that so many people across the country are looking at, if democracy is feeling a little bit shaky right now, are there better ways that we should be electing people? What is that getting attention in Oregon? What do you think is likely to happen there?
It definitely is getting attention. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but what I think, a couple of reactions to that. One, I think anything that allows people to feel like the nuances of their preferences are better reflected on their ballot, if that makes them more likely to vote and more confident about it, great. But I would say I worry about the implementation of that. I've talked to 25 or so of the 36 county clerks at this point, and every one of them brought that up. As a concern. Will they have adequate time and resources? The worst possible outcome would be to see it pass and be followed by bad implementation that would give people less confidence. It's going to be really fascinating, because while this question is on the ballot statewide, the city of Portland is conducting their first election for city council using this. And the combination of that and a bunch of other things that they've done inside Portland, they've gone to districts and multi-member districts. So there are 4 districts. They're each going to elect 3 members of the city council by ranked choice voting. The relatively high salary of those positions and the public financing means there are 100 candidates. So if you're there are like 30 people that you have to vote, that you can rank up to 6 of them. So I'm going to be fascinated to look on the 6th of November and beyond at the statewide result for ranked choice voting and compare that to the result on that same question inside Portland. Having just done this, will those Portland voters say, this is great, I want to do it again? Or will they say, this is terrible and I don't want anyone to do it?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we're having a real life experiment at the same time.
Super
and the final
interesting
point on ranked choice voting, while in and of itself, I think it's potentially net positive, I don't think it's our biggest problem in Oregon, because we have a closed primary system. Democrats vote for Democrats in the primary, Republicans vote for Republicans in the primary, and yet the largest segment of voters in Oregon have chosen not to be affiliated with a party, and they are not part of the primary system. So I think that is unsustainable. And to the extent that ranked choice voting takes up our capacity for new things, or people are tempted to say, that's it, we're not doing anything, I worry about that. I think the fact that the lack of access for unaffiliated voters is potentially a bigger problem in our resilience and full participatory democracy.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I mean, particularly that last point, I kind of feel like people are like, how do we get these choices? And if you weren't part of the primary process, you actually really mean that, right? You had no say in who the choices on the general ballot are, right?
And the ranked choice, I didn't make this really clear. The ranked choice thing, if it does pass, exists within the structure. So it's ranked choice within the closed primary on both sides.
Oh, so it doesn't give the independents or unaffiliated any more power in the primary. That's interesting. Well, we'll be watching that closely. Maybe I just want to end with kind of a little bit of a question.
What, we're ending? This is too soon.
I know. I could talk to you all day. It's just about kind of how you got into politics. I know you've been a guest on the show before, but in the spirit of kind of, to me, when we're talking about democracy, talking about making government work better, it's also understanding that your elected officials are real people, right? With real experiences, with real life experiences, the we the people, by the people, of the people idea. So maybe tell us a little bit why you've now been doing this for a while when you were in the legislature and then as treasurer and now looking to be Secretary of State. So this is, something you've really dedicated your life to, frankly, your career to. And so tell me why that mattered to you and kind of what got you into this in the first place.
Yeah, I've always said, and I still believe it, it's my parents who just were really intentional, and I'm grateful for this, in making clear that I was the beneficiary of people who'd come before me, that public libraries and public schools and soccer leagues, and these are things that don't happen spontaneously. They require the effort and investment of people. And so I had some responsibilities to invest in people who come after me and try to make sure that the same kinds of opportunities were available. And they were not overtly or exclusively electoral in their politics. We certainly talked about things and were aware of stuff, but they were really great in encouraging me to try different things and get various summer and holiday jobs and internships and those sorts of things. And I found that I really liked being at the center of these kinds of questions because it's a chance to make life better for people. And as I got older, the thing that began to motivate me and continues to is the real disconnect between the way our politics work, or it's even our human biology and the way to make lasting change. We are so focused on the short term in most everything we do that it really crowds out the long run. And it may be the thing that makes me not a great candidate. To stand on someone's door and say, yeah, I know this thing is not going to help affect the class size of your kid in this year, but it's going to create an industry and a technology and a base that's going to build the economy and a whole school system 20 years from now. But that is really where I've been attracted over time, and I think that's what led me to the legislature. And the legislature, as I'm sure other people have told you, was for me very much like being in college. Committees are like classes. You have to figure out your legislative major and where you can make a difference where not everyone else is. And that led me, in combination with the chance to have worked in the U.S. Treasury, to running for treasurer, which in some ways is sort of like a political graduate school, narrower range of influence, but deeper. And I guess I'm getting ready to graduate from that program and hopefully go on to another graduate program in the Secretary of State's office. But each of these, as everybody who's involved with NewDEAL knows, is additive, and you keep continuing to build on your experience and perspective and build on the strong network and team that's around me. And a big part of the reason that I feel optimistic about our chances in this race and what comes after is the team. And NewDEAL and you in particular have been a huge part of that from the very beginning. So I'm grateful to my parents for setting me on this path, and to everybody, in particular the NewDEAL, who've been part of it.
Well, thank you for that, Tobias. You've done so much already for your state. I mean, I look back at all of you accomplished as treasurer and legislature, particularly around this retirement savings that is really a national model. And I'm so excited to have you extend that service in this really important time for democracy, and that being very steady hand, as you were talking about, in that role. So look forward to many more years of working together.
Thanks. Make sure everybody get your ballot in early, please.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
It's great to see you.
An Honorable Profession is a NewDEAL Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at NewDEAL for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.